Hey guys. Well, thank you very much for joining. I'm really excited to introduce Anthony Alamada and Fred Brown today to give us a little bit of conversation that I don't usually get to be involved in. So I'm really excited to listen. Anthony, you've got quite the background in nutraceuticals. Since when did you get into the health and wellness and nutraceutical industry?
I'm pleased and embarrassed to say 1975.
I think it's fantastic. So just to paint some background, and then also you've got quite the marketing background of not just disrupting industries, but actually creating new industries. And so I'm really excited to start talking about how this COVID and pandemic and opportunities to really help other people with tools to prevent it. And Fred, welcome. Thank you very much. I feel very honored to have both of you guys on, but definitely honored to be sitting in the room with you guys. I've made it a goal to sit with people that are smarter than me, and today I am definitely not the smartest person in the room. And so, thank you very much. But Fred, you've spent a lifetime researching and studying and explaining, I guess, fighting the pandemics and fighting different viruses in healthcare, and then have quite the background in business, both mergers and acquisition on the healthcare side and growing businesses. So welcome. Thank you very much. And I'm excited to dive in. But Anthony, if you'd like to get us started, I know we kind of talked about what types of tools are out there. And Fred, what I know you probably have a little bit of a presentation put together. What are your...
I wasn't planning on giving you a presentation, but
But Fred, you could speak
happy
from memory, though.
Yes, Fred knows. So yes. So what type of... Go ahead.
What I thought we could start with, sorry, Mandy, is I was just, as a little vignette, I was speaking with some colleagues in Milan, Italy yesterday morning about this time. And as many know, they had an intense lockdown about 6 months ago, and they incurred a lot of infections and deaths. And this is with a plant-derived pharmaceutical company. They developed a cancer drug with Bristol Myers Squibb derived from a plant extract. So they're very science-driven. And even in the office or at home, they are conditioned to wear a mask. And I asked them how things are going because it's really heated up there. And they said they had over 400 deaths in Italy, and half of them were in Milan, in a country with, I think, 10 or 12 million people as its inhabitants. And then yesterday, Governor Newsom in California, beginning tomorrow, imposes a curfew. So it's becoming very evident yet again, that this is something that is significant. And I would say it's a tsunami that's bigger than the last one. And we have a new at-home test that still has to be approved this week from Lucira. We have 3 or 4 vaccines now that are in the queue, and we have lots of different opinions and divisiveness. And so, Fred, I wanted to ask you first, what do you do when you go out in public? What's your approach and your thought and your habits?
I wear a picture of myself because I'm unable to be viewed because I'm so covered with PPE. No, I'm just kidding. Actually, we do that in healthcare. Believe it or not, people are being treated by people who they don't actually see anymore. They've got a mask and they've got a face shield plus goggles to avoid mucosal the transmission. Plus, they've got double masks, and then they have full PPE coverage. They literally look like knights from the round table. And they literally have a picture of themselves saying, this is who I am. So they know the patient sort of has some way of dealing with them. I don't do that. I have to admit, when I try to be extremely compliant with the mask rules. I try to wear an N95 mask whenever I'm outside because that prevents transmission both in my direction and from myself. I wish that the government made those available to everybody every day for free. I think that would really help and be a great investment. And it's disappointing to me that we haven't engaged the manufacturers of the masks, people who are capable of doing this, like P&G, like Kimberly Clark, who are used to working with these kinds of technologies, and instead we're relying on simply two quite small producers. When you look at compared to the world stage, who are highly regulated and can't expand their capacity very much. To me, that's what we did not do with masks, PPE, and testing, and we did do in vaccines. The critical difference in that was we did ask the manufacturers to get involved in a very major way. We did start to at least expand their manufacturing capacities and invest in with them. We did give them EUA so they didn't have to follow every regulation out there, and we bought the first billion doses of the manufactured product on spec. And we didn't do that with PPE. We didn't do that with testing. And believe it or not, these vaccines that are coming out, which are 95% effective, if we actually used masks and did testing properly, we'd also have 95% protection. That's what they've done in Taiwan. That's what they've done in Korea. That's what they've done in China. And we've just been sadly non-compliant, non-disciplined, and pursuing a very deadly strategy. It probably killed an extra 200,000 people because we just didn't, we somehow politicized mask wearing. I have no idea how. And then we didn't test anybody. We couldn't find out where the virus was. That kind of that was completely irresponsible. I do try to be responsible when I go out. I think it's something that is a patriotic American. I wear the mask. I try to keep. I carry hand sanitizers at all time. I have wipes with me all the time, and I stay my distance. And I almost always meet people only outside. I don't meet anybody inside at any time. I haven't met anybody inside for any event since February.
I was listening today on NPR. They had a storyboard, which is a way of recording between two people, a dialogue, and then it gets put to the National Library of Congress. And they had Tony Fauci and his wife, who's also a physician. I think she's a physician. And they were talking about how their three daughters will not be joining them for Thanksgiving this year. And because Tony is of the age that would be a higher risk, yet he's an endurance athlete, you presume he's very fit. And they described the challenges, the emotional challenges of not being able to share with your family. And what people are doing now, despite the shortage of tests, is they're using tests as a way to give them the green light to go travel for Thanksgiving next week. But in that context, you said N95, and a lot of people don't know what that means, but then people have been asking me, because I use them sometimes too because of availability, is I use a N95 or Korea manufactured N95, which apparently via certification is just as effective as an N95 domestic mask. Tell us, Fred, what is involved in making a mask, an N95 mask, and how it differs.
Yes, the N95 masks actually have to meet certain specifications. They have to screen 95% of 3-micron particles out of the ambient air, and in fact, the Chinese regulations are slightly higher than ours. There are also regulations about how much air can escape from the sides. Chinese allow 8%, we allow 12%, 11 to 12%. So they're actually slightly better. The best masks to use actually have a slight pocket in front of you that actually causes the air to slow down before it even reaches the mask, especially if you're on high velocity sneezes or coughs. It's better to have a slight pocket in front of you, a little bit like a duck bill. So those are the very most effective masks from our tests right now. Even though the cloth masks are still 70% effective, and which is literally 5 to 6 times more than no mask at all in both directions. That means both transmission and the receipt of the inoculum. One thing is that the person who is wearing the mask is slightly less protected than the person who is not wearing the mask in a two-way conversation. And that's disappointing. So it's harder to protect yourself than it is to protect others. Having said that, the CDC just finally released the studies that indicate it does protect you as well. Sadly, that took until after the election to figure that out. I'm not sure why, but they seem to have not been able to do the test until 2 weeks after the election, which is sort of which really is disappointing, frankly. I think to have known that in advance would have been helpful, because we had a lot of rallies, we had a lot of get-togethers, and we put a lot of people at risk unnecessarily.
So when you give out percentages, not unlike the percentage that are protected from the vaccine phase 3 studies, where you're referring to studies done at North Carolina or at Duke and in Florida, where they looked at the transmissibility of viral particles or gas leaving the breath or assimilating the breath, which is an interesting way to approach it. Can you tell us about what those studies revealed in more
Yes,
detail?
they were conducted at Duke. They were conducted in the as I recall, kind of in the June-July timeframe. And what they found was they were actually able to use a machine that very consistently allowed a certain velocity of air to be pressed through cloth. And they then used laser technology to understand the dispersion, the size of the dispersed molecules with different scenarios, including sneezing, coughing, breathing normally, singing, playing a bassoon, playing the piccolo. They did everything possible. You can imagine, Anthony. It was quite something. And so and what they found was that basically N95 masks are the very best. They'll eliminate all but the 0.1% of all of all breath coming through the fabric, and that's because they're not a woven fabric, they're actually a pressed fabric, and those extra crooks and crannies that are created by the pressing of the fabric together, the different size of fibers, actually is slightly better than having a woven fabric. Then the next level down was a surgical mask that removes everything except about 0.3% of the particles coming through, and they work electrostatically, so they're much more comfortable to wear than the N95 mask. They're not as inflexible, but they use electrostatic connections but to trap the molecules rather than the nooks and crannies that they use. And yes, there they are. I see it. And then
these
finally,
are very common with the little manifold, and people see them.
Those are 2-ply with the 2-ply, and those are about 60% effective.
And here's the N95.
There you go.
Actually.
That's the one you want. That is the one
The
to wear.
passenger gets the surgical. I get the KN95.
I prefer the 95 also. I agree, and it's important to keep that crease over the nose, very tight to your face, as well as under the chin. People are wearing, sadly, chin guards off, and I watch them walk, and they have their nose exposed, or they have their, or they've got, the mask is 6 times too big, and they try to tape it on miserably, and so don't do that. You buy the mask that works. If you have a very narrow face, then buy one that you can tie behind your head. Don't use the elastic straps. I watch these poor kids trying to keep masks on, and the mothers are struggling to keep them on, which is good practice, but sadly they have to actually be over the mouth where you're doing that. What's interesting about the study at Duke was they actually found that some masks are worse than nothing. For example, the masks that are made out of fleece actually cause greater dispersion of the molecules in smaller size, causing more aerosols and more transmission at about a 20% rate than having no mask at all on. And that was sort of a surprising fact because a lot of people were wearing fleece. It's more comfortable, it feels luxurious, when they put it on. And in fact, they were causing their molecules to be even more transmissible and less protective than having nothing on at all. And of course, the gator masks, which are so popular, are not terribly effective. And then it turns out that there's mathematical formulas that have been derived not by the Duke study but by other groups, and they, that indicates that basically physical protections do matter. So how much blockage you do of the air is important. So a triple cotton filter is better than a double cotton filter. One with a little bit of synthetic material and to keep the weave closer together after washing is important. The washing, unfortunately, does reduce the protectiveness of some masks quite a bit. After 3 or 4 washings, you get frays around the weave, so you've got to be careful about that. And then finally, vacuum cleaner bags turn out to be the most effective at blocking, but unfortunately, it's hard to breathe through them at all. So,
Yes.
so there's a trade-off one has to make between wanting to breathe and protection. Both sadly have negative effect over a long period of time. You can't breathe or have no protection at all.
I've been waiting to see people use a brown paper bag to blow into as if you're trying to reduce your breathing rate if they don't have a mask. And I haven't seen anybody do that, but I just have been waiting for that to happen. But Fred, you make a very interesting comment that to me is at the heart of one of the areas of or origins of resistance to wearing a mask is the discomfort. And when you, for the N95 and K95, it's blow molded polypropylene, which is a synthetic material. The emergence of a new social disease called maskne or mask related acne is now on the faces and minds of many people. And acne is a scourge for many people. It takes an emotional toll. It's it's also visibly disturbing to the individual and may be the subject of some scourge or shaming by others if they don't believe in wearing a mask. But it brings to light the issue of you just stated about fleece being so comfortable. Uh, Mandy works within the hemp industry. And one of the things that we've been talking about is fashioning a mask that is incredibly comfortable and has the designs of an N95. So to encourage wearing and efficacy, but then applying a chemical treatment that after it's dried within the fabric does not lead to anything that would be breathed or inhaled, so it's non-toxic, and a chemical treatment renders the mask as an antiviral agent. You can't state that because that requires FDA authorization, but one can state that the mask itself has been treated and protected from a virus. Do you think that changing the comfort and the shall we say the appeal of wearing a mask from a sensory perspective on the face would have a dramatic impact upon use of a mask among those that don't wear them religiously?
That's an interesting question. I don't know. You'd have to do the studies and actually kind of ask different market segments. I'm sure there is a segment that is resisting wearing a mask due to discomfort. I'm sure there's a segment there, especially if they have to wear them often and for long periods of time without any without any relief, because it does start to become irritating over time. So I'm sure there's a group of people who under certain conditions wouldn't wear their masks just to remain comfortable. On the acne side of the issue, there it's very important that you clean carefully and don't wear cosmetics. I think sometimes the cosmetics under the mask become kind of a blockage to normal, even more blockage to the pores and cause the acne than if you didn't do it. So make sure you clean carefully before you put on the mask. Don't wear makeup. Sadly, I know if you're trying to be a fashion statement and can't wear makeup, but can wear the mask. That doesn't really help much. And then try to avoid the heat if you can, because as you perspire, the mask rubs against you and causes problems. So if you can, try to go outside, get some relief periodically so that it doesn't build up too much. And again, just watch the hygiene. Don't use alcohol. Don't use a lotion. Just soap. Soap and water is all you really need to prep. As far as the segments that are resisting masks, we are looking carefully at who's resisting vaccines. And there seems to be kind of four segments. The first segment is groups that say, yeah, sign me up. I want to have a vaccine right away. And so and that's about 35 to 45% of the population, depending on where you are. There is some dispersion of the population by geography and age. The second, and demographics. The second big sector is the ones who are waiting and seeing. Let's go ahead and wait and see. It doesn't seem to be a big issue here right now. I think that was true about mask wearing. If you talk to the people, they said, well, I don't know anybody who got sick with coronavirus. I don't really know anybody who's, I'll wait and see, because the mask is something new to me. It's foreign. It's not very comfortable all the time. So I'll wait and see. And then sadly, they sometimes got sick. The third group is a group, what I would call cultural resistors. They're an ethnic group who've been don't have as good access to the healthcare system, have been discriminated against badly in the past, want to have, kind of saying, wait a minute, this doesn't seem right to me somehow. And maybe this is once again, something that we can't trust. That's about 15% of the people. Then there are people who are actually angry, and they're going to actively resist. And that's sadly almost 20% of the population for vaccines, and it's probably similar for masks, maybe even slightly higher for masks, because they consider the coronavirus a political hoax, politically inspired, pushed by a particular side for gain in some way. And I would guess that's kind of almost 30% of the population. So you've got 30% of people who are actively resisting, who you really are going to have trouble convincing under almost any circumstances unless it's mandated. You've got about 15% who feel that that their ethnicity has been discriminated against in the past. Maybe this is once again a problem. You've got about 20% of the population who's waiting and seeing, and so only about 40% are willing to try it on and start right up with it. So that's the same kind of thing I think that's true about masks. And in vaccines, you got even a more active group, which has been actively anti-vax for a number of years. That isn't the case for masks. So we can eliminate that group. But what's interesting is that sort of indicates people's predisposition toward pharmaceutical intervention or non-pharmaceutical intervention for the virus, and how prevalent and risky they think this is, and what they're willing to do about it. So that gives you a sense of what we've done as far as market surveys go. And of course, you reach those people in different ways. You need to have different messages for the people who are actively who are waiting and seeing. I think they can be convinced, but they need to see that and they have to understand what is restored to them should they start to wear the mask, like being able to see the family more effectively and so on. And then for the people who are culturally resistant, we have to understand what they've been through in the past and be empathetic and try to talk through their leaders, possibly through church leadership and celebrities, often giving the message effectively. And then finally for the people who are angry, I just think they're angry and they're not going to be listening very hard to your messages, and so that's part of a challenge. So that's the way we segment the market today with vaccines, because if we don't with masks, the problem with the challenge of the mask is if you don't wear it once and are unintentionally exposed, you make one small slip, you can get coronavirus. With the vaccine, once you get the vaccine, you're protected, to that level consistently, no matter what, if you make a slip on a particular day or hour. And so we're watching for herd immunity levels that we need to achieve. And for this virus, we need to get effectively to about 85%, I think. Statistically, if you're perfect and you have your epidemiologist and you say if everything works perfectly, you're able to protect all the vulnerable people with all the vaccinated people, then we could get down to as little as 70%. But the reality is you need to be up quite a bit more than that, because we're not distributed like that, and you've got pockets of people who aren't protected at all, and so on. So we like to get up to 85%, and we're at least 30, even with a 95% effectiveness of a vaccine, we're at least 30% away from herd immunity. So even if we think that 65% of people are going to get a 95% effective vaccine, we're still only about 50%, 52% protected. The rest of that protection has to continue to come from masks and distancing and testing, and we're not very good at that. And so, people think, I'll get the vaccine and we're done. Well, that may be true for individuals, but it's not going to be true for society. We'll have to continue to be very, very vigilant, especially as we go through this period of getting vaccinated, if it's as successful as we think it's going to be.
Fred, I came across an article, I think I shared with you about a month ago, where a group in Japan took human skin from autopsy the day before, and they showed that the SARS-CoV-2, the coronavirus that is at the axis of this pandemic, can reside on this still effectively living skin sample for 11 hours. And so to me, it's always important to add in hygiene in terms of hand hygiene and face hygiene as another part of the non-pharmaceutical intervention that goes along with a mask. Because what I see people doing often is they'll touch the outside of the mask and adjust it because it can move up or down. and then they don't clean their hands because they're away from soap and water. They just don't think about it. And so that's the other unseen force. But I have what you were describing, these segments of vaccine embracing of resistance. When I was in grad school at Berkeley, one of the interesting things that we encountered was this, and this is in the mid to late 80s, is a very strong animal rights series of protests on campus because there was a significant animal research facility, mostly with mice and rats. And one of the tactics that we used to convey some voice of reason, or at least to penetrate the resistance, was that for your animals, your companion animals, your dogs and cats, they have no problem vaccinating your cat for feline leukemia virus or for parvovirus for the dog, but they're resistant to it themselves for their own human person. Same thing for pharmaceutical interventions. When your dog has an infection, do you give it nothing? Well, if you didn't do dog studies, how would you know that the study worked in dogs? And I'm not trying to convince anyone, but this was a really interesting phenomenon to watch. But what is really interesting to me is, and you mentioned this in your presentation to Harvard Business Alumni this past weekend, which was a very engaging, shall we say, viewing or episode of the Fred Brown Show, is I think you said about 1,000 different chemicals that comprise the base or the adjuvants that go into these vaccines. And one of the strong anti-vaccine messages that I've seen now for 3 decades of encountering the people that have this belief, which there may be something to it. It's very rare, it seems, but it's still out there, is that the inclusion, for example, of thimerosal, which is a mercury derivative. The coronavac in China has an aluminum hydroxide component, and you're injecting aluminum into the body. Can you give us some insight or even just a description of some of the chemicals that are going into the current vaccines? You describe them being very rare plants, for example, that help the vaccine mount an immune response when injected?
Yeah. So what we do with vaccines is we actually try to cause an immune response to the body that's permanent. And the problem is that it can either be too high an immune response. That means you have a little bit too active a virus, too many proteins, too much activity for too long a period of time, and then you get hypersensitive, or it's just not quite enough until you take a shot and you don't have quite enough immune response, and so you're actually still quite susceptible, and you don't know that. And so what we do with vaccines is we create the immune response, and then we use adjuvants to tune that response so that it's just enough to give you an immune response, but not enough to give you the virus, and it's enough to protect you. So the adjuvants are ways of tuning the immune response. So some of them will be stimulating, and some of them will be a little bit reducing. Everyone reacts to these things slightly differently. The immune system is something we've only really understood for, since I was I don't want to admit how long ago. Let's just say we still don't know very much about it. Well, I'm joking. We know quite a bit about it now, but when we're still finding out a lot about it. One of the things that we don't know very much about is durability. And we don't know what's going to happen all the time when we actually inject, and all these different group of quite complex compounds. Many of them are biologicals. Many of them are extracts from plants that are quite rare that we found over the years work to mollify or tune in the immune response to the vaccine. And so, as I said, they can be literally thousands of chemicals all mixed together in small amounts to give a general response. And we have kind of basic reagents that help put things into solution and keep things easy to vaccinate. You wouldn't, the new vaccines that are coming, I see, are quite thick and lipidy. Those are going to be a little more painful to inject, for example, than the ones that are quite that are very soluble and liquid. So there are different factors that are going to cause an adverse event. So you find that you're going to be have a little bit more pain with these vaccines at the injection sites. That's the first big adverse event. The second big adverse event that we have is you're feeling tired, very fatigued. Not so much on the first one, but on the booster shot, people are feeling a lot of fatigue. Nothing to get what they call adverse event level 4 or 5, which requires hospitalization or visiting a physician, but enough to that people complain about it to a level, what they call level 3 in the adverse event. We've seen that occurring about 3-4% of the time. And then, of course, you do come down with some of the symptoms that are similar to coronavirus: headaches, fevers, chills. Some people are so cold their teeth chatter enough that they break them. So that's quite a response, right? So you want to have that adjuvant in there to give you just a right amount. You don't want to have coronavirus for an extended period of time. In a day or two, as much as you want to take of that. So that's what the adjuvant does. And there's a trade-off. There's going to be some small percent of the population, and it is a very small percent of the population. We use these adjuvants and vaccines, for literally millions of people every year. And we're seeing, and we usually don't accept an adverse event rate that affects. You do a risk analysis, say, well, how bad is the disease versus how bad is the vaccine? And if that ratio isn't in the 1 in 10,000, 1 in 100,000 kind of range, we tend to want to find a different vaccine for that person. So when you think about that level of adverse event, it's a very small number of people, but there are going to be some. And when you are in that category, there are groups that are allergic to these items, and they should understand what they're allergic to, and there are vaccines now that are thimerosal free and so on, that you can aluminum free. You don't have to have a vaccine with aluminum in it. Those are available without aluminum. I need to look up which ones don't, but as I recall, I do not believe actually that the Moderna or Pfizer vaccines have aluminum in it. As I recall, the vector viruses do require that as an adjuvant. That would be the Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca, and of course, the attenuated live virus has the aluminum in it, and as does the dead virus, basically the non-living virus. So. The viral particle, I'm not sure about. I don't think that has the aluminum in it. So we can look that up for you, though, if you want. I can tell you exactly which ones have it in it, and that's because you want to, and there are people who are allergic to that. I'd say it's less than 2% of the total population. So have some kind of event as a result of having an injection like this, but it's extremely. It's extremely rare, and we search for that. What we have is large signal detection systems. So you're vaccinating millions and billions. Literally, these vaccines we could vaccinate as many as 1 billion people. And so we have what they call signal detection, and it's important to have that signal detection on for a good period of time. Some of these adverse events don't come until 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks, even a year later, especially when mixed with other vaccines. We don't know that yet. We have now. That's why the FDA said we've got to wait for at least 2 months before we're going to take this out. Originally, it was 1 month. And you remember, President Trump thought it was because they were against him at the FDA. The truth is that 1 month is not enough time. Most of the adverse events come in about a 40-day period. We like to wait for 6 weeks. That's the absolute minimum that we use. And so the FDA was simply going up to an absolute minimum standard. The WHO is still requiring 3 months of safety data before they're willing to release any drug. And the other big question is how dispersed is the population that's being tested in. If you're talking about only vaccinating the Chinese, for example, you don't know what the impact is going to be on other ethnicities, other genotypes, other phenotypes beyond fairly healthy younger Chinese people, and that would be a mistake then to go and jump right in and take that vaccine if it hasn't been tested in your age group and your demography. So, and by doing those things, we really reduce the amount of bad. Potential bad side effects. Literally, we're talking about 1 in 100,000, 1 in 200,000 level effects. We will know that within the next 6 months about general adjuvants.
One of the interesting things that I've been contemplating, actually there are two. I just read in the Lancet on Wednesday. They released the results of the CoronaVac, the Chinese vaccine, And looking at those data, and it goes back to what you said regarding mask efficiency, 95%, and that some particles can leave the mask, but it's not 100% effective or efficient. And then in the vaccine studies, this is one of the very few that's been published so far, is that they showed that at the dose that they recommended, 3 micrograms, 2 doses over 28 days, that 95% of the people responded with the right type of neutralizing antibodies against the virus in a test tube effectively. They haven't done the actual phase 3 study, which is what we've been talking about. But for those people, and one doesn't know unless they do blood work, if they are a responder to a vaccine. And that, to me, reinforced the need for non-pharmaceutical intervention, masking appropriately, hygiene, distancing, outdoors spaces. But what was, to me, has been the most, I shouldn't say troubling, but unsettling aspect is that the virus studies that have been done so far in the phase 3 with the Moderna, with the Pfizer and BioNTech, is that they have not yet done controlled dosing. They just put people out after they get vaccinated, and let's wait and see who gets infected. And what has not been done yet in the States, but is being described and enrolled in Europe, which hopefully will be approved, well, we'll see, hopeful, is a controlled exposure. So everyone gets the vaccine and everyone gets exposed to the virus in a controlled known amount. And then what happens? What are your thoughts about what the limitations of the current vaccine studies are in relation to its applicability to many?
Yeah. This is an area that is quite tricky. What you're describing is a challenge test, and the UK
Yes.
NHS wants to do a challenge test, challenge trial, which means you take the virus and then everyone you're exposed. Right now, what we're doing is they're taking the vaccine and then walking into and assuming that because over time with all these people, eventually statistically it'll all average out. And when you're getting into the tens of thousands of tests, and at this point we're close to 100,000 people having been injected with some vaccine or another that's out there. I think that's a reasonable assumption, but you never can tell. So the challenge test is one that how much exposure everyone's had, and my feeling is it's probably this virus is dangerous enough and has enough long haul effects that if you were to fail the challenge test after being vaccinated, that would be a very negative outcome. That it probably isn't worth the risk. Frankly, I think we can get there without it. We might not get there quite as fast as normal, but because if you look at the way these studies are conducted, unfortunately, we chose clinical endpoints that were fairly easy to achieve. We chose clinical endpoints that if you have even a minor symptom, you go to the doctor and you say, I know I had I was one of the people vaccinated and I think I have the coronavirus, and then they test you, and if you're positive, they note that down, and then later they break the seal and they see whether you were vaccinated or with something that was active or something that was just saline solution, and they found, of course, that there was a huge separation in those populations. The people who didn't have the vaccine were 95% of that population of infected people, and the people who did have the vaccine were only 5% of that infected people, of that infected group. And that's the way we tend to do these tests. For Ebola virus, for almost all the viruses I've done, we didn't do the challenge test unless you've got a very good medicine. If you've got a very effective backstop medically, then it's then you're fine. You infect the person like the flu, and you give them Tamiflu and say, sorry, and it's not terribly deadly, doesn't have long haul effects, and then it's very ethical to go ahead and I think do a challenge test to understand the broader population question you're asking. But if you don't know what the long haul effect is, you have nothing to stop a virus that goes out of control in someone's body, then you shouldn't do a challenge test generally. It helps the epidemiologist figure out a few extra numbers, but it doesn't. It's just too dangerous in my opinion. I think it's not ethical.
Fred, when I first heard about the challenge studies that were being designed in Europe or in the UK, I was shocked at how many people had enrolled. And so I have to think that there was a strong financial incentive to enroll, and the belief that, well, if I get infected, I'll be able to deal with it because I'm 35 and fit. But and you made that very key comment regarding a backstop drug. And I was listening to an interview with the CEO of Eli Lilly in Indianapolis, where they have their antibody test now for emergency use authorization, and they've shipped 88,000 doses. But he was saying, given this new tsunami of infection, they will be nowhere near the ability, even fully scaled up, to produce enough monoclonal antibody for injection.
Yeah, that's true. We use the monoclonal antibody for two reasons. The first big reason is for a prophylactic effect. So if you're a frontline worker who you think you're going to get exposed often, you try to boost, you try to give yourself sort of a temporary boost. And these antibodies last for about 150 days in the body, and that's all you get. It might be slightly longer, but that's in that range. And these are neutralizing antibodies. So what's nice about it is that they really are powerful. Unfortunately, we would need to have literally 10 times to 20 times the amount of those antibodies available to give everybody who wants one of those tests. That's about 20, and in the United States, about 17 million people every half a year or so would need to have that prophylactically. And we can only produce about a million, as I recall, 1 million a month on the Lilly side, about 1 million a month on the Regeneron side. Those are the two that have been emergency use authorized. So what we do is we give them only to people who need a boost at the end of their cycle. And the reason we're waiting till the end of the cycle is because we don't do enough testing. We don't know people are getting sick, when they're getting sick, and so we're waiting till they get to the hospital. At that point, we say, oh, here's an injection of this stuff. And it's very hard, once the virus is established, to stop it. These drugs would be so much more effective if we could identify those people who are tested or think they've been exposed because they didn't wear their mask on day 5, on day 4, right, of the infection. And it turns out they're most effective when they are on day 5, not when they're on day 10. So they actually prevent a lot more of the exposure to others if we were able to identify these people, have them mask appropriately, give them their medicine, and that would really be very, very helpful. So we're just barely able to show statistical significance if we inject people at day 10 when all they have is a 14-day course of the disease. If we're able to inject people on day 3, 4, 5, that would be tremendously effective. And that's what happened to President Trump. He was lucky enough to have access to everything that was necessary. He got the injection on day 3 or 4, and of course he was having rallies 2 days later. That's the difference in waiting, that much longer with these monoclonals. You also have plasma effects of polyclonal. We can do about 4 times as much polyclonal work. The problem is that we have to have neutralizing antibodies, and we're not having as many neutralizing antibodies at the levels we'd like with the plasma protein as plasma, the convalescent plasma, as we do with the monoclonal antibodies. So those are the kind of high level things about about antibody work. They are very effective, but you got to give them early.
What I heard is that the Lilly antibodies are being assigned to people that have mild to moderate COVID-19 presentation. What is intriguing is for the vaccines. I've read that the people that are not being described as being candidates for treatment are those that already have been infected. And what continues to arise are increasing numbers of cases where a person is reinfected despite the belief by many that that initial antibody response will protect you in the future. What are your thoughts about reinfection?
That's the biggest X factor. Durability is a thing about the immune system that we know least about, unfortunately, and it takes longest to find out. By definition, we won't know whether the vaccine is more than 9 months durable because we haven't vaccinated anybody for more than a 9-month period. So whenever you hear claims of, it's going to last forever, they say, okay, show me the study, please. And they'll say, they have no data because they can't, by definition. Even in macaques, we haven't tested these vaccines that long. So we've got 9 months of data. What's interesting on the vaccines is the Europeans do test very regularly with the genetic code of what's infected with the COVID virus. The COVID virus mutates quite a bit. fortunately, we do have conserved portions that we can create a vaccine against. But the areas of mutation actually will tell you whether it's the same virus that's simply sequestered inside of you. And I think that is quite often that the reason you see people saying, "Oh, I've been sick," and then 3 months later they become sick again.
Mm-hmm.
More often than not, that's because the vaccine is hidden in your lymph nodes, in your testes, whatever. The virus is hidden its way away, and then it comes out again once you haven't gotten enough sleep, haven't had the right nutrition, have possibly been re-exposed. We think that exposure levels overall. So mask wearing isn't just about the first time you get coughed on; it's about the second, third, fourth. And it turns out that there is a cumulative effect that we're starting to see over a period. If you get sufficient inoculum over a period of time, because you haven't worn your mask, then you will be more likely to come down with disease, and that could be happening also. What's interesting is that in Europe, they've only seen about 5 or 10 instances of when you've been infected by one strain or one clade of viruses. Then they do the genetic test. Here's the genetic test, and therefore we've defined your virus as this virus very precisely. And then 3 months later, they retest you, take that genetic strain, and look at, and if it's not a match, then you know that you've been reinfected, not simply that the virus has bounced back and suddenly gotten you. So there have been about, I think, 7 or 8 reports after a 4-month period. So it looks like 3 months. We've got at least 3 months of durability, but after month 3, at that point, there are groups of people that have that the immune response has sunk so low that they can be reinfected. And so that's sort of what seems to be at least the first part of the threshold we're seeing about durability. And there will be I think there'll be a spectrum of responses. Some of us won't have as durable or as effective response as others. And so we'll have to continue to test serologically. We'll have to continue to think about mask wearing, for those people for a good period of time.
That dormancy or that stealth hiding of virus in the body is very reminiscent of a viral infection that a good portion of the population has, herpes simplex virus with an oral manifestation, where you get the sun blisters, or you are sleep deprived, or you have an immune challenge, and then it pops up out of nowhere. It's a lifelong infection that just has these dormancy, relapsing, remitting excursions. So it will be really interesting, as you say, and time is against us because we want more time ahead of us, and we can't accelerate that. So it's very much wait and see.
Yeah, it is. Luckily, this is a respiratory instead of neural infection. So hopefully, it won't last a lifetime within you, or just simply being suppressed. HIV does the same thing; it hides away. But so far, we're finding it more easily this time. The sheath coat doesn't change that rapidly as it does for HIV, malaria, and we don't seem to have a sequestering in a very protective part of the body like the nervous system, like herpes, is able to escape. So unfortunately, we have ACE2 receptors in almost every major organ of our body, and so it could go to places that we don't want it to, and sequester or pop back, or we could have immune response that are kind of overwhelming. The bradykinin storms seem to be still in question. It looks like the cytokine storms are less of an issue than we thought, which is great news, because that kind of sepsis response is a really deadly one.
Well, this
Fred, you're
goes
going medical geek on us, ACE2. So that's angiotensin converting enzyme 2. And that's a protein that's involved, that is made by the kidney, that's involved in regulating blood pressure, but it also happens to be the receptor which the so-called spike protein attaches to, and it's its portal of entry. And cytokines, of course, is this big inflammatory storm that dexamethasone, a very old drug, has been shown to be effective when people get severe lung inflammation that basically shuts down breathing. So yes, it's fun to have that chat with you. You were going to say something, Mandy? I apologize.
You're okay. This just reassures, or reinstates the importance of these tools that we have to prevent the virus. Fred, I don't know if you know, I just got over COVID, and so these conversations make me nervous it's this unknown and what's coming, right? And the fact that, you know, my immunity may only be a few months, and I've got teenagers that are in school and playing sports and doing things that are exposing us at a much more rapid rate, right? Than being, than some of our activities don't allow us to not be, or I guess we choose to. My kids still play sports, right? They still do participate in athletics, and they have a small team, but when one kid on that team is infected, all of us were infected, and every one of our families were infected. And so with that being said, these masks and the importance, you know, I go back to how many realistic women and people in business are going to say, well, through this pandemic, we're not going to wear makeup, and I'm going to give up the vanity. And so coming up with tools like a mask that allows it to be a layer, or almost like a vaccine, a barrier that really prevents this and protects us, is even more critical. And I'd really like to dive into, you know, what those fabrics are like at some point, putting the polypropylene on our face and the dyes, and the difference between mask that works versus one that looks good. You know, and I'm really taken back, Fred, by the increased spread in certain masks. You know, we talk about wearing it over your chin or over your nose, but the actual mask itself is equally as important. And so I'm really excited about the development and what we're working on collectively, and what this group is, Anthony and Kate and you, to create something that really is a barrier while we're waiting for, you know, the research and the tools.
And it's not just wait while we're waiting. Actually, you know, if you think about what China does, but think about what Taiwan does, that they actually are already in control. And now you add the vaccine to that, and you're not going to get a super spreader event as a result of going to the drugstore to get the vaccine to begin with. You'd only have to go a little bit further to get to economic normalcy, a little bit further to get to social normalcy, a little bit further to get to health normalcy. And we've got, I think we have 685 deaths. So we're about 400 times more dangerous here than we are in China. Our chances of dying are literally 600 times higher than they are in China, or Taiwan or Vietnam. It's several thousand times higher. We're that much more dangerous here, and it's because they are disciplined about their use of non-pharmaceutical intervention. I mean, the Taiwan experience was all about masking up, testing and tracing, and stopping it before it moves to exponential growth. And if you can do that, then you're going to have a much better experience when you actually do have a good vaccine, to actually take that and then you'll be able to stop all the extra things you have to do today that much faster. We're going to go through a long period of time where we're having to wait for the effect, and China will not.
Well, I think you said it well. This was really made into a political, however it was done, but made into a political affair. And I think that that's even being said back to, you know, economies opening versus not opening, and certain counties adopting it and others not.
Well, I see you're wearing some red today, and the virus probably preferentially went after you as a result of being a red jersey holder. I think that's what happened.
But Fred, what you didn't know is that
don't quote me on that. That is not. I should not have said that.
I didn't even mean it politically. I mean it. I live in Utah, and I'm not a BYU fan, and
Yeah,
so
I'm wearing the blue.
Anyway,
oh my gosh.
We're out of time, Anthony. It's 8 o'clock. So I know we kind of want to wrap up and maybe do this again, but thank you very much for coming on, Fred. It was
my
wonderful.
pleasure.
It was
pleasure.
Great.
Dr. Brown, Mandy, thank you very much for hosting us.
Absolutely. Thank you, you guys. We'll be in touch soon.
Have a great weekend.
There is one thing. Italy actually has about 80 million people in it, not 12.
80. Thank you for changing that number. What did how insulting to the Italians.
But that's okay. They're used to that.
Still, that may be the number of people that live in Sicily. Okay.
Okay.
So
northern Italy, you're right. I think northern Italy, the area that was impacted was about 12 million.
Milan, yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Give thanks for health.
Thanks, you guys. Talk soon.
Thank you guys.
Bye-bye.
Have a good day.